Thank you for participating, listening, discussing. We do appreciate it. The topic today is your wireless LAN obsolete. A lot of changes going on in the industry, a lot of soul searching I know going on for my colleagues out there in the world. When do you make moves? Do you need to make moves on going to new technologies, new solutions, new vendors, whatever? Something we kind of constantly think about to some degree. And the topic of obsolescence certainly pushes us to make some of the decisions we make along the way. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of, take a philosophical and kind of a critical thinking approach to that topic, especially when it comes to wireless. And it comes from some things that I'm dealing with in my professional life. And I know I'm not alone. Various groups talk about this topic a lot in different forms and fashions. So here we are. And hopefully we can provoke some thought and have some good discussion at the end. So not to dwell on me, but it has to be at least mentioned. There in red, third bullet down. I've been doing this for a while. I also had a career in the military before I got into networking. But in my networking time, in 27 years, especially with Wi-Fi, I was there, almost from the very beginning, doing the Wi-Fi thing. For the topic we're about to talk about, you have life cycle refreshes, you have strategic decisions about, are we using the best vendor for, our needs, et cetera. And, the perspective I'm about to share comes from doing this for a long time. And when I say doing, it's installing, doing the field work, doing the layer 2 stuff, all the way through, managing extremely large networks and, being the decision maker for an organization on what products get used and what architectures get used. So soup the nuts, I have done it and I'm still doing it. And that's not to brag, it's just to set, an expectation of my frame of reference, where I'm coming from. So I figure it might be worth starting, what does it mean to be obsolete? And as with a lot of topics, there's what the dictionary says, and then there's what we think in our minds, and then there's what various industries, how they take that word and they kind of use it differently and all of that. So just a little bit playing with the word here. Obsolete, not in use anymore, having been replaced by something newer and better or more fashionable, because Wi-Fi is all about fashion. But something is not in use anymore. That alone makes it obsolete. Again, just kind of getting you guys warmed up here. Let's look at another one. No longer produced or used, out of date. Yeah, that's got some relevance to Wi-Fi on occasion and the various ebbs and flows of products. Down at the bottom there, I've got the red arrow highlighting cause a product or idea to become obsolete by replacing it with something new. So you'll hear vendors say, yeah, we obsoleted that. That's on our obsolete pile. Can actually be a verb. We made that go away. We obsoleted it. But we're trying to stimulate the business by obsoleting last year's designs. That statement leads us into the concept of planned obsolescence. And planned obsolescence is a way of life in the technology world. And it's interesting, even without getting into any of these links, because it's just a screenshot, but I like some of the questions that are on here. Is it legal? Is planned obsolescence legal? About a third of the way down the page there where it says laws. How is planned obsolescence legal? Why is planned obsolescence legal? A lot of people obviously bothered by this notion of You buy something in X number of years or months or whatever, it stops working or it slows way down, or there's a fostered expectation that you're going to have to replace it. And, planned obsolescence is its own study. If they're doing it right, you're well aware of the fact that this thing has a lifespan, and you're going to have to expect to buy your way out of obsolescence in some time frame, right? I mean, this is not just wireless when we talk about the grand subject of planned obsolescence, but this is technology in general. A lot of times it's the automotive industry, or at least certain parts of it. Arguably, household appliances. It's the way the world works. Everybody needs to make money and have something newer and better to sell, and just kind of is what it is. But we're going to play with the topic and apply it to Wi-Fi here as we go. So we're talking about uh, being obsolete. We're going to eventually touch on the notion of planned obsolescence and kind of how we have to deal with that along the way. Moving on from the definitions, moving on from just the words, let's start actually applying them to our own situations. Right? Is your wireless network obsolete? Like right now, the very network that you support and use, is it obsolete? Or the networks that you provide to your customers, if you're in that side of the business, are they obsolete? Well, that word is kind of interesting. I'm guessing probably for almost, well, maybe that's a little strong. I'm guessing for a lot of people, if your network itself isn't obsolete, and we haven't even talked about what that really means specifically to networks, probably parts of it are. But just kind of give it some thought end to end, what in your network, geez, that's obsolete. I know that's obsolete. I know that's got to be updated. I know that's end of life. I know whatever, but just kind of challenging you to give it some thought before we dig into the topic. As with everything wireless related, whether your wireless environment or not is quote unquote obsolete, it's going to depend, right? Bits and pieces go obsolete, and those bits and pieces, the easy ones to envision, access points, they absolutely do not last forever. That we know. Well, let me rephrase. A lot of access points do last forever. They're just bulletproof. They're battleships. These things are just made so well, they will run forever, but they're not going to be supported forever. The hardware is just fantastic. But, an AP is not just hardware, it's also the code that runs it. So, certainly, from that perspective, things do go obsolete. APs do. Controllers, they certainly, same thing as APs, even if they're well made, they just don't last forever operationally. They don't last forever from the perspective of the vendor. They don't want them to last forever. So, that planned obsolescence thing. Switches, arguably a switch can be really good, but it can be obsolete from a PoE perspective because you get new APs. The next generation of APs needs more power. Your switches can't do it. Hate to break it to you, but your switch is obsolete. Can you live with the obsolescence? It's another question we'll wrestle with in a little bit. Obsolete does not mean run out and replace it. Let's just blurt that out right now. We're just kind of pondering, the give and take of living with it, or moving on and replacing things. And we'll get to all of that in a little bit. But again, switches, the hardware is really easy to envision. The code running the hardware is also pretty easy to envision. Then there's the question of, how obsolete is obsolete? What does that even mean? Some things are catastrophically obsolete. If I don't replace this today, I'm going to have a problem tonight. And then there's other things that are just like, yeah, we don't have tech support on that anymore, but it doesn't matter for a number of reasons. So sometimes obsolete is, really, really worrisome. Sometimes something being obsolete really isn't that big of a deal. And again, we're going to flesh all of this out. Just we're at the seed planting stage of the discussion right now. Whose definition of obsolescence are we running with in these conversations? Certainly a vendor, people selling, the components that go obsolete in their mind, end of life, end of support, end of whatever, you ought to be buying new stuff. And then you have us end users who really aren't always in a hurry to part with our money, or we may have no choice but to wait it out for another budget cycle. And we contemplate things, and it's like, well, it's not supported, but people are using it. Nobody's complaining. So, by our definition, maybe what the vendor is saying obsolete is not obsolete. And I know a lot of this is stating the obvious. I'm revealing nothing. Uh, you know, there's no grand revelation here. There's no epiphany, just kind of stirring the pot of discussion. And then this one we'll talk about in a little bit. Do you have any defenses against the notion of obsolescence? Can you self-insure? Can you see it coming and maybe take some steps that, give you a little bit of defense against, things going obsolete? It's just not as black and white as it might seem. More to talk about. Just a quick aside and a quick statement of the obvious, right? Nothing lasts forever. And this is in no specific order, right? Um, our designs, they don't last forever, or rarely do they last forever. Sometimes we get it right and we can reuse it a handful of times, but eventually, in the vast majority of cases, the design we did, design 1.0 is not going to take us through many, many, many generations of wireless. And, going by the Wi-Fi Alliance's numbers, whether you like them or not, we're up to, 6. So is my 1.0 design suitable for my 6 network? Probably not. So our designs don't last forever. On a personal level, certainly our skill sets don't last forever if we don't keep them fresh. And we do have skills that can go obsolete. And I used to understand IPX and AppleTalk. Yes, yeah. In my mind, that those products have been, put in the dustbin, and or those protocols. And if I had to do something with IPX and AppleTalk today, I got nothing on that. I mean, we're going back a lot of years, and like I said, I'm old. So if anybody else has been fortunate enough to work on either of those, I'm guessing you haven't had to think about them in quite a while. If we don't keep our skill sets up, or if we find out that we're working on something that is no longer all that relevant to the industry, our careers can get obsolete. Product lines, complete product lines. Think about the various products you've seen come and go that have been obsoleted. When I think of that, my first thing is the old beloved Blue Socket wireless guest gateway. That I used to use. I loved that thing, and I fought tooth and nail when Adtran bought Blue Socket, and they retired that gateway, and they moved the feature set into Blue Socket APs or into Adtran APs because I had no interest in buying Adtran APs, but I really, really, really liked that very simple guest access gateway function. But that product line was obsoleted, and I had no choice but to live with it. We certainly know wireless standards. One replaces another, no news there, right? Companies, think about all the mergers and acquisitions and just flat out going under of various tech companies since you've been in the game. No offense to anybody, but I'm thinking of like Maru and Colubris and Reef. I think there was one called Reef or something like that. They had a little shark thing. I mean, this is back in the early days of lightweight APs. A bunch of them have come and gone. A bunch of outdoor coverage oriented companies have come and gone, right? Companies don't last forever. They become obsolete for whatever reason. The usefulness of a given technology, either on the client side or the network side. A lot of things come out, they hit the light of day, maybe they work for a little bit, or maybe they seem appropriate for a little bit, and then, their usefulness fades away. Same with cultural fads, things that people like to do that have an impact on the network kind of come and go. And then as security changes, right? Security, we're kind of in this thing, this phase where, lots and lots of people are moving into IT security because IT security is just becoming such a huge concern everywhere. And, we question what we did yesterday. Is it secure enough for today? And if, God forbid, you got to deal with auditors, the heat just gets turned up on those questions. Versus if are in a position where you can just make your own decisions and say, yeah, that's good enough, versus being mandated by regulation or, like I say, by auditing teams. Nothing lasts forever, right? That's life. Life has changed, and again, there's just no news here, but it certainly does impact us as wireless planners, doers, administrators. So let's come back to the question. Where is your specific wireless network on the general timeline of obsolescence? And like I said before, we all have different answers to that. It depends, and it situationally depends, because even though we tend to all have common concerns, we can examine those concerns and come to different conclusions. We measure obsolescence in different ways. I will say, I alluded to it before too, the second bullet, just because you're not on cutting edge hardware, the absolute latest, greatest, that alone doesn't mean that you're obsolete. I do want to pause and ask, is your wireless network meeting requirements? That alone really influences the answer of whether you're obsolete or not. It doesn't give you the answer totally, but it does bear certainly on the oldest hardware in the world. If it's meeting your requirements, well, there's going to be some food for thought on whether, what that means when you consider how obsolete you are, the varying degrees. So again, challenging you and I to consider our own environments. What technology do you have in use? What standard, what generation of APs? What clients are using that network? What is your security posture? When I say posture, I'm talking about things like, are you doing 802.1x? If you are you doing PEEP? Are you doing TLS? Are you doing something else? Do you use two-factor? What kind of pain do your users got to endure to get to the goodies on the other side, the network goodies? Is it appropriate for what's going on, the way you operate the network? Is your design, as I referenced before. So your network underpinnings, mentioned switches before, kind of a holistic consideration of our own environments. And then there's the stuff that we declare to be obsolete. Like I have long since declared that 802.11b data rates are, to me, they're obsolete. A client shows up, wants to use them. To me, that client is obsolete. And that kind of goes into my strategy of running the network. It goes into my policy. It goes into my, sorry, I cannot help you. It's one of my lines in the sand. And I will use that terminology with people. Well, you're bringing something that's obsolete to the network, and I just can't support it because the network is not obsolete. And I'm not going to penalize everybody else for the poor technology choice you made. But again, that's a little bit of a detour from the topic about the environment, the wireless environment itself. But it does come into play. It does actually, have a piece in the overall puzzle. And I'm going to tell you that one part of the system can be obsolete, but it doesn't mean that everything is. At the same time, holding on to one obsolete component does have a lot of ripple effect, or can have a lot of ripple effect on the system. And again, back to the switches, right? I'm putting in APs that can do 6E. I'm putting them on switches that can't give full power, so the switches can't do everything that they would do if I was actually giving them adequate PoE. And eventually the budget will catch up and I'll replace those switches, but the ripple effect of putting in those or using those limited switches is that I don't get everything that I'm paying for out of those 6E APs, right? Again, the ripple effect of one part of the equation being obsolete or highly limited or whatever you want to think of it as. I've also, had in, well, I'm going to talk about a scenario where there's another example of that, but we'll stick with the switch example for now and not rush things. Again, when you look at this slide and you look at the bullets and you look at the questions I'm asking, the answers are going to be different for all of us. Even though we're all playing the same game, sometimes we're playing by slightly different rules. Just a quick pivot. Those of you who do think critically and maybe you're a little bit in the management side of things too. A lot of what I'm talking about here does parallel life cycle management. Sooner or later things need to be replaced. That's just technology life. But sometimes waiting is advantageous, and the dollar sign is not a typo. Sometimes we can save money by not just rushing into the next thing. And if we decide we can live with our quote unquote obsolescence, to maybe skip a generation or skip a something and get to the next one, especially if nobody is going to know the difference that's using the network, it is good to sometimes wait. If you are with a vendor, we're let's go down the list there. The stunted client devices. When I say stunted, I'm thinking I've got wireless locks, and I'll just name the company from a company called Asa Abloy. When they first came wanting to put locks on one of my big networks, all they did was 11B, and it's like, no, you got to get to at least G or you're not welcome to play on my playground. So they quickly updated their capabilities to G, and that has been approximately 150 years ago, and we're still stuck with 11G locks. Is it G or maybe it's whatever? It's absolutely 24, and I think it is still G, but I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, apologies to Asa Abloy. But they're absolutely still in no better than 11N. And think about life. How long have we been in post 11N life? So if the only thing I'm running in that network is those locks, why am I going to rush into 6E? Right? If you're on a vendor or if you do business with a vendor who is frequently buggy with their code, like catastrophically buggy, you're probably better off waiting. Again, the rushing into the next thing just to not be obsolete. I know I use one wireless vendor. They'll put out a new AP. I will not go to that AP for at least 18 to 24 months because the code underneath it, and that's right, I'm saying 1.5 to 2 years, because the code underneath it tends to be so buggy by precedence. I just don't want the admin pain. I don't want to subject users to it. I don't want that kind of disruption in the network. So, waiting is advantageous, as I said. If you're dealing with nothing but private networks, you've got a wireless network that's used for something industrial, port operations, something, very purpose specific. A lot of times going to the latest, greatest, even if what you're on is no longer supported, there's just no gain to it whatsoever. So sometimes, again, waiting is fine. The secondary market, APs turn over so quickly, controllers turn over so quickly, and the quantities that we put APs out there, you could probably buy, APs that listed over $1,000 when you bought them. Whether you paid over $1,000 or not, it's another story. But you could probably buy these, 1K or better APs for, 20, 30, $50 on eBay. So you could self-spare and keep yourself going for quite a while. If you know people, you can find alternative tech support, even if things are, end of everything. When I say alternative, I mean just smart people telling you what's wrong with your system because they know they've been there. They're in the industry, whatever. Maybe they work for the company and you happen to be buddies, but there's all kinds of ways to cultivate what I'll call alternative tech support to keep yourself going. If your requirements haven't changed, just because there's new products out, going to the new stuff maybe isn't the best move. Just doesn't get you anything. And if you wait it out, better technologies might come around. One great example, LoRaWAN has been just a really, really good fit for a lot of things that are not right for wireless. So, rather than compromise and get forced into doing something with wireless that you wouldn't do for some specialty thing, it's like, well, let me show you LoRaWAN. It's a lot better fit for what you're trying to do. I don't need to change anything on my network, and you get to where you want to be, and we're all happy. And a better technology has been used. Wi-Fi is not the only technology, wireless technology in the world, and the other ones do need to be examined. And sometimes they will help you to not have to, you know, necessarily move forward on your Wi-Fi, given whatever the solution or the situation is and what people are trying to do. On the other side, the previous slide was like, us in the field and us as end users. On the other side, though, the vendors, they need that planned obsolescence, right? Got to keep the marketers busy, got to keep the shareholders happy, got to keep moving new stuff out the door. Hate to break it to you, but the new stuff only gets more expensive. A single AP these days lists for what a 10 pack of APs used to. These are flagship APs. It's just kind of getting, to me, things ought to be getting cheaper because they're more commoditized and, all of that. They're only getting more expensive and ridiculously so in some spots, especially with licensing. So, vendors need this. They need to keep it moving because they need to make profits, and that is life, right? The industry kind of loosely moves in lockstep, and when I say that, all the vendors are kind of doing the same thing, right? They all put out new APs roughly at the same time. They all introduce new features roughly at the same time or within months of each other. Just an observation on my part, different vendors do better with those transitions. I know a couple of them, they put out a new product. I don't really have to worry about bugs. Another one or two put out a new product, and the assumption is, like I said before, plan on a year or more of nothing but bugs. So, to me, that I don't care how obsolete I am, I'm not rushing into a bug situation. Um, it all kind of goes into the soup when you're contemplating how obsolete you are with each evolution of the wireless standard. I find that the systems get more complicated, so the vendors are trying to hook you into more and more. It used to be you bought a wireless system for client access, and now you're buying it for client access and 200 other features, and you can't separate out those 200 features if you want to. So when you look at going forward, yes, I'm obsolete, but getting into their next thing, what if I don't want all that? Or what if I don't want the licensing that I have to buy to get into the next thing because it's for a bunch of features I'm not going to use on one of these super systems? The vendors tout it and paint it as innovation, and for us it's like one more thing to filter through and figure out what is the payoff going to be, or what is the penalty going to be if I get into this. So down at the bottom I ask, is new necessarily better? It's not. Well, hopefully it is. A lot of times it's just different. The radios should be better, the technology should be better, but sometimes they're so uh, come with so many weird bells and whistles and arms and legs that the betterness gets lost in the differentness, to use words that don't exist. So again, haven't answered the question we keep asking: is your wireless LAN obsolete? Well, I'm going to flat out say it. If your code and your hardware is supported by the vendor, no, absolutely. We'll go back to our textbook definitions. You're not obsolete at all. Everything is good. You get support, probably one of the current generations, maybe not the latest, but certainly something that everybody is going to look at and say, yeah, we're doing good with that. Does that mean you do everything right just because you bought the latest greatest and you got it out there and you got support? No, you can you can have really good products and be fully supported and just not know what you're doing at implementation. So don't think that having the latest greatest alone equals success. You still have to know what you're doing, and hopefully that's a statement of the obvious and nobody takes offense at it. If your code and your hardware are not supported, and I mean vendor supported, same question: does it matter? Is obsolete ever okay? Um, to me, it is. I mean, I've got a stadium that we just upgraded, but for probably 8 or 9 years, we were running it on 802.11 AC Wave 1 for a number of reasons, running on absolutely end of life switches, end of life code on controllers. There's a NAT component that is, active, passive cluster on the NAT thing. Bulletproof, great vendor. You could not kill these boxes if you wanted to. If I needed to get hardware, never going to change the programming on it. If I needed to get hardware, these things are available on eBay, the secondary market thing. There was just absolutely no reason to rush into changes in this stadium environment, running on obsolete hardware and code that served the purpose for what it's doing just fine. So it was meeting all of our requirements. It would have gained nothing to replace the stuff in this situation. So sometimes, I guess I just answered my question. Sometimes being obsolete is okay. Then there's shadings of being obsolete, and I'll pick up the pace a little bit. Sometimes it's hopeless. There's no budget, the management, or the environment's managed poorly. Nothing's going to change unless there's a crisis or a C-level person changes way up high to get the changes going. Like I just said in my stadium example, there's contentedly obsolete. I'm obsolete, I know it, but there's no reason to change. I'm good. And then there's partially obsolete. Like I said before, something needs to be upgraded, but we'll get there. And we can live with it until we do. So it's a kind of a nuanced discussion, and I'm sure there's more shadings that I've missed, but just to make the point, I will challenge you. You do not want to become unwillingly obsolete. You don't want to get bit in the behind because you're not familiar with end of sale and end of support dates. And suddenly you need something and the vendor says, no, we stopped supporting that 2 Aprils ago. Where have you been? And now you got problems. That's on you for not knowing those important dates. You need to know that prices only go up. Responsibly forecast your budgets, do your life cycle stuff. This is just being a good IT steward, right? There's nothing new in that statement. Watch the merger landscape. Again, that unwittingly obsolete. This is the one that really stings. I know that there are people out there that have been Colubris customers, Maru customers, and company gets bought, your preferred product that you're using, again, the blue socket example, company gets bought, things get sunsetted that you didn't necessarily see coming or plan on. And it's like, okay, now what do you do? That one hurts. And I'm watching what's going on right now between a couple of the major players where one bought the other. And I hope that I don't end up on that third bullet at the end of that sausage making adventure. It just really, that one stings, and that one you may or may not have any control over. And the notion of having an active role in what client devices are allowed on the wireless network to not get waylaid. Again, back to my, somebody brings in something that says, I have to run this on 6E. This has been bought and paid for and it needs 6E. Well, we're not going to 6E yet. We're not there. Well, now we got a problem because this is a high value, client device, and there's a lot of plans for it, and means a lot to us. We have to have it. It's like ideally the wireless people, the wireless team would not be waylaid by this sort of thing because you're playing an active role in what client devices come into your network. As we get to the end here, I'm telling you, I'm charging you, I'm begging you, be excellent. Even if your wireless network is obsolete, operate as if it weren't. Run a tight ship. Back to my athletic facility example, right? Even though everything is obsolete, we're still running it like a real network. It is a real network. We're not going to wallow in the fact that we're on old stuff and get lackadaisical. People are still using it. There's no excuse to not run it as if it wasn't absolute latest and greatest. Your clients generally don't need to know that you're running on end of life stuff if you're doing it right. Obsolete equipment, again, I kind of mentioned this earlier with different wording. If you've got old stuff, you've configured it right, you know what you're doing, it's going to outperform new stuff that's set up poorly every single time. So food for thought there. Talked about the notion of self-sparing crucial parts, informal alternative support. You run into a problem, a buddy to go talk to. Hey, I'm seeing this on my wireless and I use these APs and this, controller. What do you think of that? Well, you just got to do blah, blah, blah. That is powerful stuff, even though it's, informal and, arguably can't be counted on long-term. It definitely has its place. That's sort of what I'm calling informal support. And then the bottom bullet there, responsibly plan your way out of obsolescence. It takes more than just buying new APs to no longer be obsolete. You got to look at everything. Do the APs have the right switches? Are the switches on UPSs that have good batteries? Are my designs good? Are my technicians and engineers, are they up to what I'm about to buy, or do they need to refresh their training, right? Responsibly planning your way out of obsolescence if you are obsolete. And remember, go back to the top of the slide here. I'm saying be excellent, even if you are obsolete. That's what all of this is meant to guide you along. If you're wallowing in obsolescence, here's how you manage it.